Good morning. On this, the first Sunday of a brand new year. And as Robin said in his prayer, last year was a tough one. But this year we trust and we pray that it will be better. And I think the lesson this morning is a good reminder or a good starting point for the new year, and a reminder to go forward with this thought in the year. You know, today is a gift. That is why it is called the present. Don't you think Walter did a great job at the table? He is one of the young men that will be taking the church forward. Young men like him, we need to train, we need to encourage. Because one day they will be carrying the church forward. They are the future of the church. My lesson this morning is entitled, You Are the Salt of the Earth. And our reading was, as Robin read for us, Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through to 16. And what we have in these 4 simple verses is a picture that our Lord is giving to us of what the Christian should be in the world, the function of the believer in the world. And if we could reduce it down to one word, that word would be influence. Influence. Remember that the first Sunday of the new year, and remember it for every Sunday and every day going forward in this new year that the Lord has blessed us with. Jesus is talking in Matthew 5:13 to 16 about influence, how you and I affect the world. How are we to influence the world? How can we be in the world and not be in of it? How can we be sent to the world and yet not love it? And the solution comes in verses 13 to 16. You are the salt, and you are the light. Salt, in order to be effective, has to be mingled with the substance it is affecting, and yet it is distinct from that substance. Light, in order to dispel darkness, must shine upon the darkness, but yet it is distinct from the darkness. We alone are the salt. There is no other. We alone are the light. There is no other. There is no plan B. This is God's plan. That is it. It is just us. And if we have lost our saltiness, then we have no flavor. Salt is good for nothing except to be thrown underfoot and to be trodden by man. It has no other purpose. We are the light. There is nobody else. And if our light is hidden, then it is dark, it is out. And there is no alternative. And can you guess who has that responsibility? You and I. You and I. As I said, God has no plan B. We are it. We are the plan. In verses 13 and 14, the pronouns are emphatic. You only are the light. You only are the salt. Literally translating verse 13, it would read, the only salt of the earth is you. The only light is you. And the you that he is talking about is plural. It is you and I, the collective body of believers. You don't say to someone, pass the salt. And you take 1 grain of salt and you throw it on your food. Do you? It is a collection, a collective. It only functions with other grains of salt. And the church, to influence the world, must be collective salt. We all know the analogy of a coal. When you take it out of the fire, it goes out. But do you know the other part of that same analogy? When you put a coal, a dead coal into the fire, what happens to that coal? It is very soon hot and burning and glowing like the rest of the coals. The same is true of light. The city consists not of one light, but of many lights. Grain is not on its own, but is in together with other grains of salt, affecting the substance. And the verb that he uses here is esti. It stresses being. It stresses what we are. You are the salt of the earth. He's not saying you are going to become the salt of the earth, or you want to be the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are not going to become the light. You are the light. In John 8, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And then Paul said in Ephesians 5:8, for you were once darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Our salt influence may be silent and hidden, as salt rubbed into meat to preserve it, but our light must be shining and ablaze so that everybody can see it. God has changed us from being a part of the world to being the salt that can preserve it. From being in the murky depths of darkness into the light that shines to expose it. We must live above the world. As you sprinkle salt from above, as the light comes from above, we must shine upon the world. And that is what Jesus is talking about. What does it mean for us to be salt? How does salt manifest itself? Let me give you some thoughts about salt. I don't know if you know this, but salt is very valuable. It has always been valuable in human society. Today, it's not like it used to be. But in the Greeks' day, salt was considered to be divine. In fact, they called it theon. The Romans said that nothing was more valuable than sun and salt. Because in that day, without refrigeration, the only way that you could preserve meat was to salt it. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. And if you were a lousy soldier, you weren't worth your salt. And that's where that saying comes from. Salt was also used throughout the ancient world as a sign of friendship. Today, in the Arab world, if you partake of salt with another person, you are under the care of each other. So salt was used as pay. Salt was used to bind friendships. Salt was also used in covenants. In 2 Chronicles 13:5, God speaks of a covenant that he made with David. It was common in that time, in the ancient world, to use salt to bind a covenant. The two men entering into the covenant would eat salt together. And then the witnesses who saw them eating salt would then say, "This covenant is binding." God also prescribed salt as a part of the sacrifice, partly to preserve it. Some of it would be eaten by the priests, and some of it would be taken back home by the person who sacrificed it. In Leviticus 2:13 it says, "Every grain offering of yours, moreover, you shall season with salt, so that the salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." Who's ever read that passage and noticed that? Many times we read through the Bible and we miss these things. Salt was a very important commodity. Salt was also used to season food. And if you've eaten food without salt, you know that there is something missing. And people who go on a salt-free diet must have a terrible time about it. And then another fascinating fact about salt in Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 4 has to do with babies. When a baby was born, the first thing they would do was to wash it. And the second thing that they would do was to rub it with salt. Now, why on earth would you rub a baby with salt? You're not going to eat it. The reason was during the birth, the baby might have done up nicks and scratches or might have some other wounds. And then the salt would be rubbed on to help as an antiseptic and as healing to help those wounds to heal. And then salt also had a destructive purpose. If you really wanted to mess up your neighbor's field, if you had an argument with your neighbor, for instance, you would salt his field, and that would really mess it up. Let me tell you about what some of the commentators say about salt. Some of them say that Jesus had purity in mind when talking about salt. What color is salt? It's white, is it not? Okay, you get yellow, pink salt, which is the Himalayan rock salt and so on, but in general it's white. So they're talking about purity. Purity in life, in thought, in action, in word, in deed. Then they also talk about flavor. And some of the commentators really go crazy on this one. And they say that the world is flavorless. The world has no flavor. And Jesus is saying the world is tasteless, it's dull. So Christians are the salt of the earth. They give flavor to the world. They make the world savory. They make the world worth living. The third option, salt stings. Not only its whiteness and its flavor, but it also has medicinal and healing properties when you put it in a wound. When you have a sore throat, one of the best remedies you can is to gargle with salt. Salt has healing properties. Believers are not to be honey in the world. Many people think Christians are honey. We need to smooth the world. We need to keep them happy. We need to gloss over things. We need to keep them happy. Because if we offend them, they're not going to become a Christian. Christians are not honey. Christians are salt. Christians can be honey to one another, but to the world, we are salt. Fourth possibility, some writers say that salt was used to create thirst. It is in your body to create thirst. It makes you drink. You have to drink in order to stay alive. Without salt in your food, there would be an improper intake of fluids, of liquids. And without the improper intake of liquids, it would bring about dehydration, severe sickness, and even death. And this was particularly true of the desert country in which Jesus was talking about. And even in the modern world today, people working in summer and in the sun take salt tablets. And people in the ancient world going on a journey would take with them a sack of salt so that they would remember to drink and to stay hydrated. People come up to us and say, how do you have so much peace in your life? How do you seem to have all the answers? How come do you have this contentment? And that is creating thirst. And the fifth one, that it is a preservative. We are in the world to prevent corruption. As you rub salt into meat to preserve it, we are in the world in order to preserve it. We preserve the world from going completely corrupt. We check the rottenness and the decay of the world. Our presence should affect the way people think. Do people say when they see you approaching, shh, look, they're coming. Talk about something else. Is that the influence that we are leaving behind? Like salt dissolves into meat. It is separate and yet it is distinct. The church has got to be in the world, but never to be touched and become like the world. Unfortunately, many denominations are touched and affected by the world, trying to do and trying to favor the world. We are to be separate and apart from the world. What about your influence? Are you salty? Is your light on? Or has your salt lost its flavor? Or are you hiding your light under a bushel? What is the song that we sing with the kiddies? Okay, I know this is my index finger, but what do we use it to refer to? Gospel light. We are the light of the world. That is where the song comes from. To remind us that we are the light of the world. What happens when you walk by? Do people suddenly keep quiet? Suddenly talk about something else? Or do they just carry on talking about what they were talking about? I'm going to close with this story. A writer says, when I was saved during a mighty movement of the Spirit in the city of Glasgow, Scotland, a young lady was also saved. Her name was Helen Ewing. She was just a slip of a girl, but at the very threshold of a new life in Christ, she crowned him as Lord and absolute Saviour of her life. The rivers of living water simply flowed from that young girl's life. Although she died at the age of 22, all Scotland wept for her. I know hundreds of missionaries all over the world who warned and wept for her. She had mastered the Russian language, expecting to labor for God in Europe. She had no outstanding personality. She never wrote a book, never composed a poem or a hymn. She was never a preacher, and she never traveled more than 200 miles from her home. But when she died, people wrote about her life story. Although she died so early in life, she led many people and great multitudes to Jesus Christ. She arose every morning of her life at 5 o'clock in the morning to study God's Word, to commune, and to pray. She prayed for hundreds of missionaries. Her mother showed me her diary, one of many diaries, and there were at least 300 missionaries for whom she was praying for at all times. It showed that God had burdened that young heart with a ministry of prayer. She had the date when she started to pray for that request and the date when that request was answered. She had a dynamic prayer life that moved God and moved man. I was talking one day with 2 university professors in London. We were talking about dynamic Christianity when one of them suddenly said, "Brother Stuart, I want to tell you a story." And he told me that in Glasgow University there was a remarkable little girl who, wherever she went on campus, left the fragrance of Christ behind her. For example, he said, if students were telling dirty stories, someone would say, "Shh, Helen is coming." And as she passed by, she unconsciously left the power of God. Influence. What will your influence be in this new year? Let us stand and sing our closing hymn.